Good evening, everybody. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Business and Housing Policy Committee on Wednesday, 12th July 2023 from Walton Street, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Batho, Chairperson of the committee. Some housekeeping points before we start. This meeting is being recorded, live streamed, and will be available on the Council's YouTube channel. Can everyone please ensure mobile phones are on silent? And in the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to by our team. So turning to the agenda, item 1, apologies and deputy members.
Good evening, Chair members. We've got apologies from Councillor Eve this evening, who's been replaced by Councillor Atchell, and also apologies from Councillor Isaacs, who's been replaced by Councillor Horrell for the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
So thank you to those two deputies for being present this evening. And then on to item 2 on the agenda, which is the declarations of interest. Can I ask if there are any members who have any declarations to make, please? No? Quiet and there. So no other outside interest, thank you. And then on to item 3, which is our appointment of a vice chairperson for the 2023-24 municipal year. And can I ask if there are any nominations for that position of vice chair?
Chairman, I propose Councillor Chamberlain as the in the position of vice chairman for the committee.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Atchell, for that. Is there anybody who'd like to second Councillor Chamberlain for that position?
I'd like to second Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Councillor Prest. If there's no other contribution to that item, I'd like to ask Councillor Chamberlain to come and take a position at the table here by myself and the officers. Thank you. Thank you. And item 4, in terms of the chairperson's announcements, I don't have any formal announcements, but I'd just like to welcome all of the members to this committee. I look forward to a productive progress through what is quite a busy agenda on each of the meetings that we have throughout the year. So thank you all for your contribution to that process. And then on to the minutes from last meeting, which was held on the 28th of February 2023. I can ask the members to indicate whether they are in agreement that those are full and correct representation of the meeting that took place on the evening, if indeed you were actually there. Okay, I think we'll take that as agreed. So, and then on to public participation. We have 3 members of TAC with us this evening, Lynn Mellish, David Chafe and David Light. Welcome to you in terms of your attendance at the meeting. I understand that David Chafe wished to talk this evening, or is asked to be referred to in terms of questions at the end of the items as we go through them. So is that correct, David? You'd ask me to let you have a sort of a yes, that's right. Yes, so that we'll do that for you. Okay, so thank you very much. We also have Councillor Wallace, who's wanted to talk on again both of those items. He'll do that in respect of each of the items as we take them in turn after the introduction that's been made by the respective cabinet member. Correct, Councillor Wallace? Great, thank you very much. Okay, in that case, we'll now move on to the actual agenda items in the pack for this evening. And item 7, which is the first of our topics about retrofit housing. Can I ask Councillor Westwood to introduce this and then hand over when appropriate to the officers? As I've just mentioned, if we could then ask for Councillor Wallace to speak once you actually finish the introduction, please. Thank you.
Just to be clear on that, does Councillor Wallace want to speak after me
Yes,
and before the officers? Yes.
that's my understanding, yes. Is that correct, Councillor Wallace?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So in introduction to the retrofit housing programme presentation that we'll walk through this evening, there are many reasons why we need to invest in the council's current stock of homes, which currently number over 5,000 homes of the roughly 52,000 homes in the Winchester district. But looking at this a different way, just under 10% of all households in the district is a significant number of homes that we look after and provide as rented accommodation. As a responsible landlord, we need to ensure our homes are maintained to an acceptable standard, and a critical element of that is to ensure that our homes are energy efficient. The cost of living crisis, which is still impacting many of our tenants, is a further driver to ensure the cost of heating our homes is reduced. Improving the fabric of our homes to make them more thermally efficient also aligns to the council's core policy of greener faster by reducing carbon footprint in line with the actions to address the climate emergency. The retrofit programme needs to scale quickly so that we can bring benefit to our older and less thermally efficient homes as quickly as possible. And I would like to thank the officers for their hard work on bringing together a retrofit programme plan that will be presented and discussed today. Executing on this plan will enable this council to rapidly improve the fabric in hundreds of our EPC D band homes across the district in the coming year. And we will deliver warmer homes that are cheaper to run to many of our residents. I will turn over to the officers to take us through the detail of that plan after Councillor Wallace, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. You've got 5 minutes for your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to see this report, which highlights the enormous benefits that households can achieve by implementing energy efficiency measures. And it's great to see these benefits quantified in terms of both costs and carbon savings, showing that green is both good for the planet and for your wallet. It would be great to use this information not only as part of the justification for improving council homes, but also to encourage private homeowners and landlords to update their properties as well. The UK Homes Efficiency Report 2022 found that only 45% of homes currently have adequate roof or loft insulation, and 35% have cavity wall insulation. Implementing these relatively simple measures can save households over £1,000 this year and every year going forward on their energy bills. But any other steps we can take to get the message circulated to wider households needs to be encouraged. Now, I've got a few questions on the details, which I appreciate we haven't gone through yet, but I'll ask them now, and hopefully when you go through them, it'll become clearer. So on page 8, please can you explain why the baseline house has moved from an EPC rating of 57 or D to 20 or G on the electric sheet? That doesn't make sense to me. On each of the cost analyses on pages 6 to 8, a row is highlighted showing the benefit if all the measures are taken. For clarification, is the council's plan to implement all the measures, which would move all the council homes to an EPC rating of B or above? I'm sure you'll answer that as we go through. Final one. As you're aware, the council has been painfully slow at implementing energy efficiency improvements. A £15 million budget was allocated several years ago, and yet only a handful of council houses have been updated to date. I think it was 4 last year. This delay has had numerous impacts. For example, it's highlighted in the procurement challenges that as a result of the delays, lots of contractors are now committed to other projects. Plus, costs have increased significantly, meaning that the 15 million now doesn't stretch as far as it did. But the biggest impact by far was on households who've had to choose between eating and heating last winter. It was no wonder that tenants from around 800 council homes responded to the recent survey requesting that the council make energy efficiency improvements to their homes. So it's vitally important that these delays are not allowed to continue. Slides 9 to 11 provide indicative data on the work that is planned for this financial year, but where is the forecast plan that can be used to track progress? One of the responsibilities of councillors is to scrutinise council performance against a plan. The data presented in these slides doesn't allow that scrutiny. So is there an intent to prepare a plan that can be used to really scrutinise performance? And I would ask, actually, will the committee today ask for this information going forward? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I was just wondering if Councillor Westwood could give any initial response to that, and then introduce the officer team who will be doing the presentation. Thank you.
Yes, I will respond to a number of those, but I'll leave the detailed ones to the officers when they get to the report. So the specific one on the electric powered housing point that you made. In terms of moving to EPC B and A, that will require more than the fabric of the building to be changed. And the philosophy that we are taking is that we need to get the fabric in place in able to work on the underlying heating systems within the homes. Without the fabric, we can't change the boiler to a non-fossil fuel boiler, because the question there, Marcus, was that we can't get. The report says we can get to B without changing the fabric. We cannot get to B without changing the fabric, and the officers will take you through that and explain that to you as we go through those slides. The route to get to EPC B is to have a modern home that we've been building in the last several years, which will be up at that level anyway, or to significantly improve the insulation of the homes, the fabric of the homes in multiple areas as laid out on those detailed slides, the 3 detailed slides that you saw, which showed the journey up to EPC B. But you have to go through the fabric phase first to get there. And that will become evident as they take you through the detail there. So the plan is to move as high up that scale as we possibly can, but not in the first phase. We also have statutory obligations to move our entire housing stock and home stock to EPCC by a specific date mandated by the government, and we have to be mindful of that as well. In terms of the slow progress, that is noted, and you know, I was last year I wasn't on the cabinet, but obviously I saw the performance and the reports that we provided, as you did, on the progress that we made. And the policy last year was not the same as the policy we're moving forwards with at the moment. It was a void retrofit policy, and this is not simply a void retrofit policy. This was driven by the survey that we did of 806 of our homes last year. In fact, we surveyed 1,700 homes and 806 responded. Many of those were, and most of those were in EPC D, and that was the area that we focused upon, where people can get the greatest benefit for the money that we have available to actually move forwards with the installation. And the program that we've laid out here is to focus upon those homes that we surveyed and those that responded, and to scale quickly so that we can move them up to at least EPC C as quickly as we possibly can. And you'll see that as we go through the timeframes on the plans. Your point about tracking progress, there are other more detailed plans that sit behind these slides that we've not put into the pack today. And as the portfolio holder, I will also want to be able to track progress against plan, against the numbers that we're putting forward tonight as the numbers that we want to achieve in the next 12 months. So I'm as keen as you are to be able to see the detailed plan and track progress against that. And the progress against plan will be made public. Okay, and I think that's answered all your points at that point. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. If you'd like now to proceed to introduce the officers to present the report, thank you very much.
Yes, officers, would you care to present the report? So I believe Prashanta and Chris will be doing the bulk of the work, actually, supported by Amber, Julie and Simon.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry. Good evening. The presentation on retrofit program of our homes will be presented by Amber Russell, our service lead, Chris Gahill, our asset manager, and myself, Prashant Burbage, retrofit coordinator. What we will try and do, and if we could get the slides up, that would be great. Great, thank you. So really what the presentation hopes to do is to give you an overview of the retrofit program for the next financial year. Some of the values within this program will include 2024, but this is because of external funding, which delivers over a 2-year program. What we would like to do is to initially set the scene. What are our properties doing at the moment in terms of their energy performance? Where are we sitting? And what EPC are we sitting at in average? Once we've set the scene, we can then look at more detailed calculations that I'll talk you through. I might need to stand up for that, and I apologize, but in order to not lose you, I need to point to the various figures on the sheet. And these detailed calculations basically give you the foundation from which this program is developed. Once we've done that, it's a case of then saying, okay, what do we do with this detailed information? How do we create those programs that are going to make a change in our properties? And what does that look like in terms of programs and costing? What does that look like in terms of time and how do we deliver it? What does that look like in terms of procurement? Some of the points noted on the procurement is probably important for delivery and timing that Councillor was talking about. And then ultimately, once we've delivered the program, what does that look like in terms of uplifting our EPC rating, our energy performance in our housing? And then last but not least, how do we engage with our tenants, bring them along this journey and involve them, which is incredibly important. I think one of the biggest difficulties in retrofitting has been the inability to engage with tenants. So I think that last component is incredibly important. Can I get to the next slide, please? So this is just illustrating where we are. We've got 66% of our properties at Band C and EPC Band C. I'm going to take this opportunity to try and very simplistically explain the difference between EPC and SAP. Apologies for those of you who know it, and it might be a bit detailed, but I think it really is important, especially to answer some of the questions already raised. So EPC is Energy Performance Certificate. This is based on broad brush figures. So where the property is in region, when it was constructed, what do we assume that the roof is? So it is very generic understanding of the energy performance. SAP, which is a standard assessment procedure, gives you the more detailed, accurate calculation. So this is where it tells you exactly what that wall makeup is, exactly when that property was built. And so when we're talking about EPC, we need to understand that it's very broad brush. When we're talking about SAP, we're talking about the exact figure on their property. In terms of our asset information, we have both. So not all of our properties have SAP because we haven't done energy assessments in all of them, but obviously we then turn to the national EPC rating of that property. So whilst we get the detail on SAP, we're able to then put that back into our asset management and get a full view of where we're sitting. Can I get to the next slide, please? With regards to SAP rating, which I've just been talking about, we're sitting at 70.55, which is a C in EPC. And nationally, the English Housing Survey published that average nationally for social housing is 70. So we're hitting target in terms of a national average. Next slide, please. So if we took it back to basis, and I apologize, there is a lot of information on this slide, but it is really important to understand this. What we try to do is to take 3 properties, take it back to basics and say, okay, if we started with a baseline, and the baseline is really, you know, where you're starting from, what is that property beginning, what is its story at the right in the beginning. And when we improve it with every energy measure, so every energy improvement, what happens to that? Do you mind if I stand up? Is that okay? Can I point to the slide? Thanks. What we have is we've got the baseline and then us improving every element. So as we go down, we've got wall, loft, windows, fabric, and then certain technology. We then will look at the EPCs and the SAP, but I ask you to please bear in mind that SAP is slightly more detailed than the EPCs we have. We then will look at the total fuel bill and the energy saving bill. I will go back to my desk and then describe it. So bear in mind what I've just explained. We are looking at the most important ones, the energy measures, the EPC or SAP, the annual energy savings, the total fuel bill, and the savings on the bill. If I walk you through this, the idea was to get 3 properties and say, if one is on gas and a system boiler, one is on a combi boiler, and one is on electric, what are we going to do with what is each improvement going to do? Before I go through each improvement, it's important to understand that the calculation, the standard assessment procedure calculation that we use favors cost over carbon. So when you're talking about energy improvements, SAP doesn't see as reduced carbon as more positive than reduced cost. So it will always, at this point in time, favor gas. So your baseline on electric is always going to start lower than that of a gas property. The national government is very aware of this. The next SAP, which might be in 5 years' time or 2025, is when it's expected. They could be delaying that, is hoping to level that gas and electricity cost out. And that's really when we're going to see these properties leveling out. But that's a huge assumption at this point. And so we have to work with what we have, which is SAP 10. So if we look at the baseline, we have a property, it's on gas, and it's a system condensing boiler. We've got a 57 SAP, which is EPCD, still in the right place when we feel comfortable we've got the fabric in the right place, and at that point the SAP and the EPC and the carbon will start leveling itself out. So this is really the basis for where we got how we began our program, and I'll pass you over to Chris, who will talk you through that.
So yeah, the next slide breaks down how we are committing the planned and avoid installation works this year. It's a real step change in numbers. It's significant. Just note, please, as well as properties, we count measures, and these are sort of individual pieces of work. So cavity wall installation is a measure, loft installation is a measure, so on. So what we have here is, I'll just run down through the list, the voids, the pilot scheme that we did with internal wall insulation. We're about 4 properties there. That programme is going to be paused. We needed to do these pilots extensively, and really the outcome is this would be very hard to replicate without really significantly affecting void turnover, change of tenancy, and cost-wise, we need a plan that is deliverable across the wider stock. The next 2 items belong with the 2-year funding that Prashant talked about. This is just year 1. We're required to do a 40%, 60% split. Swedish cottages, there are worse performing and they're post-war timber frame stock. We've done about 5 pilot schemes. We know we've got specifications, really tuned now, and we've won funding there. We've got a significant amount of funding to do those homes. They make up some of our worst performing. I think they are some of the E's that are on the later slide. And together with that, we're going to do loft insulation, top-ups and ventilation to bring some Ds into SAP C. The next line is the energy assessments, and that's the pre-work, the really detailed analysis, and we have to work that to government standards as well. So we have to get accredited contractors to do that piece of work. We are progressing that well, and there's a later slide with when that should be completed. From those assessments, we will get outcomes. We will get the immediate retrofit ready work to prepare our properties, so that we know the fabric is where it needs to be for the next stage of retrofit. We have got about 150 properties, and we are working from the numbers, the success rates of access, the proportions that we've got on the number of assessments we've done. These are subject to access, and that access is going to be a big part of the tenant consultation and communication exercise. Real engagement piece needed there to hit these numbers. Cavity wall suckouts and refills. Again, proportions are based on what we're finding from cavity checks, and some of those are required because this work was done in the late 80s, early 90s. If we're not satisfied that this is fully is really intact in the cavity, if any of this is likely to have slumped or be patchy now, we want that out, and we want a full new install there, so we know the heat loss is where we need it to be. Single glazed windows, single glazed doors. We've had conservation area homes, listed homes, where we absolutely haven't been able to put in double glazed plastic windows, and so we've now found solutions for those, which are satisfying the historic environment team as well. So that's really positive. And voids, whilst we have voids out, we are going to still do work in voids. It will be less measures than on our pilot schemes at the top there. So we'll be doing loft insulation to houses, bungalows and top floor flats, and we'll be doing cavity insulation to houses and bungalows, again, to make sure that they are really performing where we need to be. Some of those, that cavity wall is already assumed in our SAP and energy performance figures, because basically a energy assessor would go there, see that there's been cavity filled from the plugged mortar holes. They may not change the SAP rating of that property. What should happen is the tenants will feel the real benefit in the heat loss and the running costs from redoing that work. So we have stated a total number of properties there. This is due to a range of factors, this is that's likely to affect delivery. We expect to improve between 450 and 600. So the number we've got there is a total of certain fields there that we anticipate will be updated. In reality, the range is a better bet, and it could be up to that 600 number. Achieving this, as we said, is going to be fully dependent on our engagement and communication with residents, which Amber will talk about on a later slide. And just to mop up that bottom right-hand corner, the 213 is 40% of the 2-year grant income, and the 2.63 million is last year's 1.2 million carry forward, and this year's 1.5 million climate change fund. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide covers the delivery of those programs, and the green is when we expect to be on site delivering that, and the red is the procurement and award period. Procurement has been a challenge, and I touch on that in a couple of slides' time. We are already tendered and award pending, as it says in the red text there, on a number of these. And we have contractors assigned for both of those. Some of them we're in talks with our procurement team, largely to make sure the value for money is still there because of the way tenders have come back. But yeah, I think probably next slide. Thank you. So this is our current SLAP distribution is on the left-hand side there. So this is the number of properties in each of the SLAP bands as they are now. And on the right is where we hope to be after this, the 2-year programme. So it's those large numbers we were talking about, 4 plus the 2-year delivery of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund funding. So the 374 homes there, which we talk about at the bottom right hand, it's 371 moving to C and 3 to B. They are a subset of the homes we talked about on the slide 7. It's not all of them necessarily, because not all measures on that retrofit ready slide will result in a move entirely up a band. Band D covers 14 points, for instance, from 55 to 66. So while we're making progress, we can't say that they are necessarily moving into the next band. But this is all, you know, it's about retrofit ready and ensuring the fabric is performing as we already expect it to. So the very positive from this is that is a shift of about 20% of the council's SAP D homes up to C, which will be a really notable achievement when we get to that point. So sorry, next slide, please. So the procurement challenges, we don't want to downplay this. This has been significant to our delivery ambitions. But you know, the release of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, £778 million with a 2-year delivery period, all required to be carried out by Trustmark accredited contractors, has put quite a demand on the market. It has pushed prices up in a market of already increasing prices of labour and materials. Framework. So some of the larger housing associations and consortia that command hundreds of thousands of stock in the country, they have tied up frameworks with accredited contractors. They are virtually closed to new members. We've used a specialist PAS 2035 framework. We invited all 8 contractors and only got 1 bid returned. Winchester is a relatively small authority, small packages of work compared to some of the bigger authorities. So the costs associated work have increased significantly. The single bid we received was significantly higher than estimate. So we're paying high premiums being paid to accredited installer just due to these demands and opportunities. Our procurement rules, our own Winchester procurement rules, do frustrate and limit the speed of some of that procurement. The tender thresholds are quickly exceeded. The 250k quote limit is challenging, compounded by the increases in labour and material. An open tender process over 250,000 is very admin and time consuming, vetting a volume of unknown contractors. And our previous use of construction line, which is a government mandated scheme, that was removed from the last iteration. So a select list of contractors for tenders, pre-vetted tenders is not there for us now. Having said all of that, we have some future solutions to explore, and they are things to explore at this stage. For non-social housing decarb funded properties, we have a consideration where do we build to the Trustmark standard. So the specification can be the same, but the accreditation of the contractors installing would not be there. It may be that there's some partnering and training that we could do there to achieve the quality that we're looking for. We can investigate dedicated internal workforce options, so a direct labour force, building on the team in special maintenance we've already got. For instance, trialling loft insulation installations, something we could potentially grow. And there's the option ourselves to investigate consortia and joint procurement options. So looking at other local authorities and looking at improving our volumes of work that we're putting out to the market and trying to attract those bidders. And the last thing, our two major term contractors, Osborne and CCS, their contracts are due for renewal in 2026. And it would be our intention that as retrofit becomes more standard to our processes, that these specifications and retrofit works are actually incorporated into those procurement exercises. So volumes and so on, and options for direct employee there available. I think that's over to Amber for the next slide.
Thanks, Chris and Prashanta. Great, next slide, thank you. So as you've already heard, we've done some work with tenants already about our retrofit ready programme. We've alluded to the resident survey that was carried out in December 2022 and the positive results that we had from that survey at that time. We've also followed that survey up with a focus group in February and March, which wasn't as well attended as we would have hoped. And that throughout the retrofit talks, there's been ongoing discussions. I'm looking to the team of tenants to my left at our service delivery group. This topic has always been on the agenda now for several months, and the team have been actively participating in what's been going on, and their thoughts and engagement have helped frame the advice engagement plan to date. But looking forward, as we said, the success of this programme really relies on us engaging with our tenants and having their support, allowing us to access their homes. We fully appreciate that our tenants have got very busy and complex lives, and some of the works that we're looking to undertake would be quite disruptive and quite challenging. So it's really important that we're engaging with our residents, giving them lots of notice about what we're intending to do and talking to them about their concerns. So when we're putting together plans and programmes, we're addressing all of their issues, and we're really clearly explaining how we can help and the real benefits that some of these measures will have for them. As the councillors of Councillor Wallace mentioned in his introduction, you know, this is real cost saving and will make a massive difference with the cost of living crisis to some of our residents. So at the moment, a group of officers, including myself, are working up an engagement and communication strategy. And we really want to make sure, as the councillor alluded to earlier, that we have evidence of the value through the engagement that we're doing. So we're really keen on measuring that tenant involvement and the outcomes that that gives. We're also positively looking into having a specialist post, so a resident liaison officer. This is a lot of tenants that we're looking to speak to. It's a lot of work if we want to do it properly. So we're looking at using our current resources to have a resident liaison post, an specialist officer who will lead on that tenant engagement and be able to provide that one-to-one advice and support for our residents. We're looking at running more focus groups, and for all of the different strands. There are quite a lot. I'm conscious that there are quite a lot of strands to this project, and all parts of the project are slightly different. So we want to hone in on those different strands to make sure that we're getting particular tenant views on those issues, so we can put together the right proposals for those strands moving forward. So there will be lots of focus groups and opportunities for tenants to get involved moving forward on the different strands. We're also looking to recruit resident champions for each of the strands. We've already got somebody who's really keen for our Swedish retrofit to be a customer champion, and something that I'm particularly keen on. I think our residents do listen and engage with us as residents, but if it's another resident telling them what they went through, how they were helped, how they were supported, the impact that those measures have now had on them, their home, their energy bills, I think we're more likely to get more customers on board that journey with us. So that's a really important piece of work for us. As well as the regular targeted communications, we already do a lot of these communications, but it's building on those communications, really raising the profile of this programme moving forward through our newsletters, podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, tweets, competitions, activities and community events. So everything we're doing with our community, we want to be asking them about the retrofit programme, what their thoughts on that and how we can help, really raising the profile with our residents. And we're already producing home user guides and technical equipment guides, FAQs, hints, tips, website information for the properties that we've already upgraded or the ones that are in process. So it's making sure we've got that bank of knowledge and information to give to our residents as well. So there's a lot of work on this particular strand. It's quite complex, but we do have a very knowledgeable group of officers that are supporting that particular work, and we've also got some very willing TAP members and service delivery group members and other tenants. So I'm very feeling very positive about that piece of work, and I'm hoping that we will be able to help a lot of tenants and get a lot of tenants involved, so that we can meet our targets for EPC C and above moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you to Prashanta, Chris and Amber for that presentation, a very thorough and comprehensive presentation on our progress so far with the programme. I'd like to then open up the meeting to questions from the members of the committee. Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. There are a couple of data points. Could I just clarify before we sort of get into some of the detail, just so we're all of the same understanding, if that's acceptable, Chair? Could the officer team just remind us all and confirm what our statutory obligations are going forward here, just so that we understand what it is that we're expected to deliver? Could you also just help me, Chris, I think you were talking about the 522 properties on page 9, how you arrived at that number, because otherwise we all get confused about which totals we're talking about. And also, could you help me to understand those residents who responded positively to the energy efficiency request, so the 800 that we've talked about? What do we know at this point what ratings they have, and how do they fit into the overall assessments you have here? Because obviously we want to get to those who have the worst performing homes as quickly as possible, but that may not be the reflection of the 800 who've replied. So just managing expectations of those who've replied, you know, what's the bell curve for those in terms of their ratings, and where do they fit in this? Thank you, Chair.
The last point first there, the 800 that we wrote to a pool of 1,600 residents, and they were all from the SAPD and below group. So they were all among, and we got that level of response. I think it was 806 out of the 1,600 that we wrote to. Is that okay? Is that, yes? So SAPC, we're aiming for 2030 for SAPC. And there is a piece of work also going on over the summer with an HRA business refresh. So we're trying to see what we can do beyond the 15.7 as well. So that piece of work is already underway. The numbers, we got to 522, and that is that comes from the 4 voids, which are internal wall insulation at the top, the 8 Swedish cottages, the 140 loft insulation top-ups on SHDF, 150 retrofit ready insulation top-up and ventilations, and 60 single glazed window replacement properties. The 30 that are doors are likely to be the same properties because they are conservation area properties. So we've not counted those again. It's within the 60, and then it's the 160 on the void houses, bungalows, and top floor flats loft insulation. Now that's the 522. As I said, the range is 450 to 600. You know, with the engagement, we really hope to be able to push these numbers out, but we have to be realistic also about access and so on. Is that okay? Was that all the questions?
Thank you.
Councillor Horrell. Councillor Scott, I think you may have had a question.
I've got a few, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. If I heard right, it was about 2 years government funding coming in at this moment in time. So my first question would be, after the 2 years, where does the funding come from? Second question is, a lot of the retrofit inspections coming back, when I've spoken to surveyors on this matter, a lot of residents are saying windows, windows, windows. When you look at sort of your schedule of works and so forth like that, if you see an overwhelming response by residents saying windows, 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 does that change your thinking on the graph structure? In regards to the bids and only one back, are we thinking about then, if we're very limited because the rest of the providers are probably hogging the market because they've got overwhelming numbers that they could, nationally have in this project, are we then likely to then perhaps think out of the city council box and maybe incur some involvement in city council in Winchester district private homes, and maybe because we know we've got an awful lot of landlord HMOs, maybe involve them in a wider project moving forward, and perhaps that could be presented to further some more funds nationally in that respect, rather than limited to just city council tenants.
Thanks, Councillor Scott. I will note the last point. It's not something that we've got on our future solutions, but we can, if it helps to increase numbers, it's quite complex when you're applying for funding and you're going cross tenure. There is a lot of funding out there for private sector as well, and I'm sure our private sector team are already trying to push that. I know there was a piece of work going on with Agility Eco and a Portsmouth consortium that dealt with the private sector. Noted, and we'll look at that. Windows, Prashant has already talked about the payback. I mean, that's not the only reason we would do it. We're well aware the council had a very intensive programme. I think they had a factory here when they did the first PVC window install in the late 80s, early 90s. So there was a very intensive period of fitting windows, and they are approaching their 40 years. So that programme starts to come in anyway in about 4 or 5 years' time. We have part of that HRA business plan refresh that I talked about. It's still very much in its infancy. That does look at windows and reprofiling of that. So we have noted, residents' wishes in that, and the fact that they are approaching their end of life. And the last funding after 2 years, yes. So the SHDF is just I think they called it around 2.1. It's that there will be more funding. The government, and I can't remember the overall figure. This is only 778 million. This aspect, there is billions, and they are releasing it in phases. So we'll, by that point, if we've explored some of these other solutions with consortia or other local authorities, maybe there's options there, but there will be more funding. We certainly aren't going to do this on the 15.7 million. So we've just been through the bid process. It was very intensive, to say the least, and we know what we're letting ourselves in for, but that's absolutely got to be done to stack the numbers up.
Councillor Ashwell.
Thanks, Chairman. Question for Prashant, really clarification rather than question. Your table really brings out the savings that you make, and obviously the wall and the roof insulation are the biggest savers, and that's fantastic what brings out over here. The clarification I was looking for is you compare the system boiler and the combi boiler versus electric ones. When you look at the saving that you make, either for the cavity insulation or the the roof insulation, those numbers for the gas match more or less, but for electric it's a lot less. Is it because I think you are using different SAP for the energy baseline, and hence you look different figures? And if that's the case, is it easier or is it better to compare apples to apples? So keep the same SAP for the gas and for the electric to see how much savings you can make. It will make a difference, perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. You're right that the calculation for the electric is dealt on the fact that your usage is obviously electric and therefore your cost is higher, so your SAP is reduced. Your fabric improvement is still the same, but your savings are reduced because of the electric. Yes, absolutely apples for apples. However, this sits on the back of, do we move to electrifying, because that is where the government essentially wants us to go sooner, or wait for the calculation systems and the industry to level up in terms of electric and gas before we go down the electric route. And really it's just to demonstrate that if we did go prematurely down the electric route, we are leaving our tenants in fuel poverty in a worse position that they would have been. So that's why it's a case of, do we compare gas and electric, and do we go electric full on from this point, or do we just wait that much more, invest in our fabric, and then wait for the industry to level up and make those electric costs come down so they are comparative to gas? I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
And Councillor Prest.
Actually, so thank you very much for your presentation today. It's extremely clear and concise and good. Thank you. Building on what Councillor Ashwell was saying, it was again clarification. If I've read the combination of your charts right around electric and the SAP rating of electric properties and the number of properties we've got in those very low bands, even though it's on a separate slide, is electric a very small proportion of the properties that the council has?
I will get used to the mic, sorry. Yeah, so almost 90% of the homes are on gas. It's about 2.5% have air source heat pumps, 6.5% are electric quantum, high heat retention storage heaters, and 3%, around 3% are biomass, old storage heaters, electric boilers, a mix of systems. And there's about 41 still on solid fuel. So it's that kind of 90% and 10% basically is off gas.
Thank you. And I had one more question. You talked in the procurement challenges about the big factor being the amount of contractors who were already, if I may mischaracterize it, but tied up in contracts elsewhere. Why do we not have contractors tied up in the same way that people elsewhere do?
Volume of work, I think, is effectively it. I think the housing associations that have 50 or 60,000 stock across regions have really been able to generate other funding, and certainly through the SHDF have, you know, they're attracting the national contractors, and the accreditation is very detailed, very costly to achieve, and it really isn't a kind of a small local builder type scenario. It really is these big organisations, and that's really where we believe the issue is.
Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I echo Councillor Prest's comments on the detailed presentation, and I fear therefore I'm about to ask a stupid question. I'll ask it anyway. So from a tenant's perspective, there would be the potential then for multiple visits. So if I was having insulation, doors, windows, etc., by virtue of the fact that you have multiple procurements, there could be multiple visits over a period of time that a tenant then would experience. So my question, I guess, first off is, do your procurements cater for that scenario, i.e. contractors, potentially different contractors, to work together to do individual site visits to facilitate multiple work orders at one time? And if not, does the internal workforce option provide a potential mitigation to that? And I ask that question, I guess, through two lenses. One is obviously partly the tenant experience and whether they have to go through that scenario. Secondly is obviously from an efficiency perspective, if we're looking to ramp up and deliver en masse, is there an opportunity there?
It's very much by measure at the moment, the procurement, apart from things like the Swedish, where we know there are multiple measures, they are let as a whole house retrofit. But it's very hard to, it's very difficult to align across all of the stock every measure that needs doing on that property without not leaving, you know, to really focus on one area and then not to create tension with not doing work in another area. So we're trying to make as broader improvement as we go. So it is something we've debated about the way forward, but we just can't, if we concentrate on one property and do everything, it might be several years before we've got the money to do the same in the next, along the next location. So yeah, welcome any sort of thoughts on that. Really.
Councillor Horry had a further question.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the charts because it's very clear what you should do. The data tells us very clearly where the gains are to be had. So that's the rational bit. The emotional bit is engaging the hearts and minds of our tenants and making sure that they come on this journey with us and they feel that they're getting something very quickly and positively back from that. So I'm encouraged by Amber's contribution in terms of the different dialogues that are going on. But having visited a couple of the people who went through retrofit last year, it wasn't a happy experience for some of them. So I'm just really keen that we've got excellent data here, but we really need to put our hearts and minds into that tenant involvement, because I think it is correct that once people understand how good it is and what they can gain, and because we're giving something back in terms of the cost to them in a difficult time, that will be very important. But I think we have to do things differently than how we've done it so far, and try and think very clearly with the tenant representation team on how we can achieve that, because they say we won't get there as quickly without that level of support. And also, I do think some of your ideas, Chair, in the procurement solutions are things that we really should be working very hard at to see if we can up the pace here on what we can do, because obviously the market is tight at the moment, but if we can join with others or find other solutions or self-help, that may really push the numbers along. So that may not be our natural space as a council, but actually maybe that is something we need to, those procurement solutions, look at more aggressively. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horry. And Councillor Prest.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, to echo what Councillor Horry was saying, the engagement piece seems really key with the tenants, and the solution to that may well be finding language and ways to let tenants know about the value proposition for them in a way that's incredibly understandable. This is a fantastic presentation, but much of the language in it you would not take to engage people with. So I would encourage, and I know that you know from Amber's presentation, lots of work is going to go into that. I had quite a niche marketing question because you had a long list of places where you could engage people. And it might be that engaging them at the most painful point is the most impactful way of doing it. So it's just a very quick question. Is it possible to work with energy providers to communicate with people when they're receiving their bill? Because that is the absolute sort of moment of conversion that you might hit if you were able to.
That's not something that we've thought about, but yeah, that's certainly something we can look at and take on board. So yes. We'll look into that. Thank you. That's a good suggestion.
Councillor Miller.
if this programme starts to be successful, which hopefully it will be, how are we going to control the expectations of ones that haven't been done? Because if it starts to be really successful, 5,000 houses are going to want theirs done quickly, aren't they? So I haven't worked out how you're going to communicate how it's going to be set out or stages of it.
We've kind of approached it from a worst first basis. So we have been trying to do it logically so we can justify to those. But you know, even with those, the 800 people we had replies from, you know, we're already now being asked, and when are we there? So we absolutely appreciate it's very high on people's agendas. And, you know, it's tough. Bills are tough at the moment, aren't they? So we're trying to keep it worst first. That's all I can say.
So I was going to say it will also be working with the contractor that we procure with as well, because we'll want to, you know, if we can do things quicker by focusing on certain areas, estates, to limit costs and time. So it will be those things that we'll take into consideration. But I think the most important part is that we'll communicate with our residents as to when they can expect us to be doing that work in their home, and keeping them updated as to when that's going to be happening and if there are any changes. I think the most important part is keeping people informed, and I would hope that people would bear with us and be understanding if they know where they are on the programme.
Thank you very much. I'd like to draw the questions to a close at the moment and ask if TACT, David, I think you wanted to make comments on the
Thank you for being able to attend. In view of the fact that it's only a limited number of people, mainly the committee of TACT, that have seen these papers, I don't think we could make a comment on behalf of TACT, but we're pleased that we knew some of this information from repairs and maintenance, and this is an update. But how we are going to present this or something, same information to TACT members, is going to be a little bit difficult, because I think some of them will feel they're on the list and they know they're on the list. Others will think, well, we're not on the list and we're going to be inundated at a later stage. But I think the fact that page 13 really explains how the policy is going to be instrumental and work is a great help. But I think it's going to land up in the end that the ones that are going to be involved firstly are very well primed to what is going to happen. And there's also going to be, in some cases, you're going to be working at number 41, but 43 at the moment is not on the list. So you're going to get a little bit of, why are they having it and not me? But it's a good indication that Worcester City has at least looked at the energy situation and have come up with some of the proposals. But I've read this 4 times and I'm still a little bit confused on some of it. So that's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And I think that probably provides a suitable summary to the overall questions that have been asked this evening, in that, yes, we're all positive in terms of the programme itself, but it's going to be critical in terms of the way that it's communicated, firstly in terms of that information and the data that is contained in the report, but also to make sure that we have then a adequate, sort of response to the comparative progress and how people are being selected to go onto the programme. So very key in terms of that overall resident communication. Sorry, Councillor Westwood wanted to have a further point of comment. Thank you.
It's kind of you, Chair. Thank you. I just wanted to reply to David, actually. I'll look that way and talk to you, otherwise the microphone won't work. You raised a really important point, David, and that it is imperative that we have that communication process correct. I know Amber is working on that, and I'm well aware that we might work at number 41, but not at number 43, and we must have a really good answer as to why we're doing that and understanding it must be in simple terms, plain English. And David, my commitment to you is that I will work hard with the team to make sure that we communicate this properly and clearly across all the residents. This is so important that we get that right, otherwise we don't get the buy-in. So that's what I would like to see. I'm sure my officer colleagues won't mind me saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood, and I'd like to now proceed into debate on this particular paper. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Excellent piece of paper.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Scott, before you start, I'd just like to summarise. So just for the members of the committee, this policy is being brought forward with recommendations that the policy committee are asked to note and comment on the scheme and whether it would support further work and due diligence so as to enable. Who's the next one? My apologies. Carry on, Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair.
I've been successfully restrained. Thank you.
We're all on your side, Chair. Good news story from the City Council point of view, the tenants' point of view moving forward. Reducing tenants' carbon, excellent story. Reducing tenants' bills, excellent story. Liaising with tenants, as we always do, and very well, excellent story. There's lots of people will remember the good old modification days when families were moved up the chalet homes in the valley for 6 months, when the coal fires were ripped out and the central heating went in. And I was one of those families, went up there, and we were up there in 1974. We've been there before as tenants, and it was a great project. It was an outstanding piece of work that needed to happen across homes, and the council achieved a absolute fantastic piece of work. Yes, it's up. I'm not saying that we're moving families for 6 months like we did back in those days, but there's a little bit of an upheaval to get benefits. And I think if we can explain that to tenants, that sometimes there's a little bit of upheaval, a little bit of dust, a bit of noise or something to give you a bit of pain, but you're going to get some gain. And that's where we've got to explain in the communication we get across. I also think from an officer's perspective point of view, we also need to know that you've got other factors. Property services got other factors, housing's got a lot of active factors. So we need to support you in helping you move forward as councillors, because you have a phenomenal amount on your plate. So this is just one aspect, a good aspect of what the council's doing, but we also got to recognise that you're also doing a phenomenal amount for our tenants already within the property service area and within the sort of the tenant communication and aspects that we support our tenants with. So again, thank you, officers. Brilliant piece of work. Thank you.
Any more for debate? Councillor
Horrell. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officer team for bringing this paper forward this evening. And I think it's very helpful for us all to understand the detail of the game, the rational bit, as I said earlier, and the intention with the tenants. I do think the request earlier to understand how we monitor this and how we're reviewing our progress is going to be important. There were many questions asked in different committees last year about how many we had retrofit or during the year. So if we could head that off at the pass and agree how we put those checkpoints in, that would be helpful. And also, I think the basis on which the changes will be made, to the point made, you know, it's this house and this street and not that one, or it's this house and this village and not that one. Or by the way, we've just had another 20 voids come in and we're going to do those first, which then changes the programme. We all need to understand what that means and how we communicate that. Because obviously you have a significant number of voids on your list. You won't know where they're coming from. They'll just pop up as they do inevitably across the district. And that obviously changes a work plan and a schedule because you're not predicting necessarily where they come from. But Chair, I think this is hugely important. But I sort of endorse Councillor Scott's view that, you know, housing has a huge number of plates spinning, a very significant amount, and that there are the general maintenance issues, the issues of the homelessness, our commitments to those who are refugees in the area, endless different elements of your work. And I think we just need to make sure that we keep all those plates spinning as effectively as normal. And I think the message I would give to the senior officer team is you need to make sure that we as councillors understand what those issues are if you're short of resource, both people or money, because we'll be hoping for delivery in certain areas. But if you can't, you need to keep us abreast because otherwise our expectations and your delivery won't match. And historically, we've all worked brilliantly together across the council for the district. So I hope that's a positive message that if it all becomes rather expensive and difficult, that you make us aware of how we have to manage that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ashwell.
I would like to congratulate the officers and the presenters. Really, the fantastic presentation that we had, and brought out the low-lying fruits that we have. Now, if we can tackle this, it'll take us Winchester's policy of greener, faster. Definitely will help in that sense. We already mentioned about the available time period, maybe 2 years or 3 years, whatever we got. If we have that schedule in front of us and if we can monitor it as over a period of time, it will help to convince people who are going through this exercise that it is definitely helping. And when they see the bill coming down, and that would be the proof of the pudding. And no doubt, other people will jump on this. So I definitely endorse this particular approach the council is taking. I would wholeheartedly support it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Prest.
Thank you, Chair. We spent a lot of time tonight talking about houses and properties and a little bit less time talking about the people that live in them. And I think it's really important to remember for people that right now is a time of great uncertainty. Uncertainty around jobs, around education, the right to travel, around bills, around the health of the planet. And people's houses in a time of uncertainty are incredibly certain things. They are a constant. They shelter people, they're a base for their families, and they are the glue that holds all of us together, either as individual families or as communities of people who live in the same area. So I think this is incredibly important work. We obviously want to do it right, but these are people and their houses that we are dealing with here. So I wholeheartedly support it as well and commend you on some really important work.
Thank you. And Councillor Chandon.
Thank you, Chair. I echo all the previous comments and wholeheartedly support. I think the only thing, taking a step back and looking at it, over 5,000 houses, multiple measures underneath it. From purely a project management perspective, it's a pretty significant undertaking in its own right. So we've had a couple of comments on the kind of the forward tracking of the schedule. I think the only thing I'd encourage is the officers to look at the mitigations and potential contingency within that schedule, whether that be measures that are built into the procurements, internal workforce as a potential mitigation, also discussed this evening. It's just not to underestimate the level of undertaking that's in front of us, but wholeheartedly support.
Thank you, everybody. Which city council has set a challenging target to be carbon neutral by 2030? and this programme is positive evidence of the dedication of our officers to achieve this. Their creative thinking has enhanced the retrofit programme and will allow the Wichita and district to benefit from the associated carbon reduction, and our residents a welcome savings in the cost of energy required to heat their homes. And I think in terms of the conclusion from the debate, I think all of the members have provided support to the programme and congratulate on you on the presentation here. I think in summary, it's just sort of a concern about the overall programme in relation to your other work, and to make sure that if there are any conflicts that in terms of the project, that's then brought back either to this committee or obviously to others as the work sort of progresses through the council, and that in terms of the communication, that's going to be critical in terms of making sure not only in the outset residents understand what the programme is, but that then as it progresses, how they are fitting in with that programme and how they might then, in terms of the actual impact on their property and their work of lives, that's then communicated. So I think that's, from my point of view, the summary of where we are in terms of the debate that was concluded. I don't know whether this is then asking for us to provide a vote of approval, or whether it's just for comment. So I'm getting a shake of the head. So from Councillor Westwood. So I think we'll give you our voice of approval. We don't necessarily go through the formality of actually sort of passing that as a resolution. But thank you all for your presentation this evening. Thank you. Okay, so if we now move on to item 8. Which is the item on carbon credit trading. If I can then hand back to Councillor Westwood to introduce this, and then briefly, I think Councillor Wallace, you'd like to have a public question after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We're pleased to bring to the committee today a short discussion paper on the potential to generate retrofit credits through the work of the retrofit programme, where we're improving the thermal efficiency of our council homes, and the scheme is equally applicable in the future when upgrading the heating systems in homes to reduce the carbon intensity of the heating system. The purpose of today's paper is to seek the comments on the scheme from this committee, and to take into account the committee's comments to support further work in order to enable a report to be presented to Cabinet in its September meeting. To be clear, carbon credits generated by this scheme can be used to offset other emissions within the overall Winchester City Council carbon footprint, or could be used to generate funds that could be used to further the retrofit work, or used for community value, or used perhaps for a fuel poverty fund. I'd like to say that this is not a new concept to local authorities, and there are in the region of 60 other authorities that have a similar policy and scheme in place. So there is, we are not the first in this space. I'll hand over to the officers to cover the detail after Councillor Wallace has had a chance to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Councillor Wallace, if you'd like to ask your question. Again, you have 5 minutes to do that in. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So there's lots of issues around carbon credit trading, including, so I've called out 4. So we've got the calculation of the carbon credits. How's the process for calculating carbon credits been proven for home energy improvements? Obviously, actual carbon savings depend on not only what energy efficiency improvements have been implemented, but also how the occupier uses their energy. So an estimate of the savings will be needed. But carbon credit calculations are not straightforward, and the system has been shown to have flaws even for accredited firms. For example, the voluntary carbon standard for certifying carbon emissions reductions is administered by an organisation called Verra. This is the same organisation that is providing accreditation to this scheme indirectly. Earlier this year, a journalism investigation found that 94% of the rainforest carbon offsets provided by Vero were worthless. There's clearly a risk, therefore, that any carbon credit calculation may be considered inaccurate in the future, which could reflect badly on Winchester Council. The second point is on embodied carbon. Can the scheme provide credits for embodied carbon so that whole life carbon emission reductions are fully considered? A building's carbon emission reduction can be enhanced with a selection of low embodied carbon materials and fabrics. This would complement operational carbon emission reductions and the retrofit credit funded benefit for wider Winchester environmental and social values. So can you use a good loft insulation with embodied, and with that benefit? Third point's on double counting. Has the system been established to ensure that the sale of a credit cannot lead to double counting of benefits? If a credit is booked to the scheme, then it cannot be claimed by the council. So the council uses this, for example, if the council uses this scheme to upgrade all 5,000 Winchester council houses, and these benefits are claimed by a third-party organisation, Winchester cannot claim to have made any carbon emission reductions. This may be difficult to explain to residents, and there's clearly a risk that this could be misunderstood. Overall, carbon credits are controversial. There is evidence that carbon credits slow or even reverse an organisation's goal of reducing carbon emissions, as offsetting can be easier than making the real changes that are needed to reduce emissions. So there is a real question about whether, and there's an ethical question there about whether the council wants to be associated with this practice. Yeah, I look forward to hearing your response to those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Westwood, did you want to make any initial responses, or should we hand over to the team?
No, I'm happy to make an initial response. I thank Councillor Wallace for his input. This is the sort of input that we require to be able to put together a sensible report and recommendation to Cabinet in September. So thank you, Councillor Wallace, for your input.
Thank you, and I think Chris, you're going to lead the presentation on the carbon credits, I understand. Thank you.
So, the purpose of the report is to update members on the intention to access a scheme called retrofit credits in order to generate additional investment by trading carbon credits earned from energy retrofit works carried out on council homes. And we asked the policy committee are asked to note and comment on this proposal. The scheme resource implications. The scheme is largely administrated by the operators, but there is a considerable amount of staff time required in property services. We do have to provide a lot of documentary evidence for all of the reasons we just heard to make sure that these are valid claims and so forth. And whilst the staff time would be justified by the potential income, it should be noticed this is an additional process that we'll need to manage where we are. So the retrofit credit scheme has been developed by HACT and Artica Partners. They are both experienced in their respective areas of social housing and carbon credit markets. From an environmental credibility point of view, Artica calculates the potential emission reductions under the verified carbon standard, and HACT then calculates the potential social impact via a UK social bank. Retrofit credits controls who buys each carbon credit, as the scheme has an ethical framework to counter any concerns about greenwashing, effectively misleading statements about how environmentally friendly a company's products or service actually are. So they have some policy in place. Retrofit credits is the only carbon credit project for UK housing retrofit that is listed under the verified carbon standard. As innovative service will unlock additional funding by verifying emission reductions from investment in decarbonisation projects. Once the retrofit work is complete, the home's submitted for crediting and the documentation I've mentioned, we have to populate and submit for their verification. Verified carbon units or credits are generated for emission reductions achieved during the prior crediting period, and credits are sold to buyers validated and enrolled in the service, and a benchmark price is currently being established for the pilot. The housing provider receives payment on an annual basis until 2042 for the credits earned, or can use the credits to compensate or offset towards its remaining emissions, which would be another discussion piece along the line. Just in conclusion, we've talked about the 15.7 million that's available. This could be a really valuable income source to use for a number of purposes. It could be for further retrofit works. It could be to offset other emissions beyond 2030. But it also could create funds for further community value, tenancy support, fuel poverty fund, and so forth. That will come on another paper. Winchester City Council's retrofit projects for the period 2023 to 25, that's the social housing decarb funds that I talked about, that has the following forecasted benefits. You've got hopefully the report on the table there. So the number of homes that would be initially enrolled, and we've done, these are scenarios we've done through HACT, through the HACT portal. We've not registered, nothing has gone beyond that stage. So we can enroll 518 eligible properties during that period. They would, the projected carbon reduction would be 259 tonnes per year. The social value would be £124,520 a year, and that is not an amount we receive. That is a monetised measure for the work, for the resulting improvement in health and welfare, especially to the households that have received the retrofit works. So the annual credits 259.82 equate to the tonnage, and the lifetime credits, which is a 20-year period, is 5,196 tonne of credits. So the reason the figures below are a range is because the figure is still being set, the market is still being established by HACT. So these ranges are between £55 per credit up to about £80 a credit. So the figure there of the projected annual income after the 2-year delivery period, it ranges 14,290 to 20,785, and that is based on that £55 to £80 credit figure. That total income returns potentially 472,515 to 687,295, and that's based on an escalation of 5% a year from the £55 to £80 credit. So that's the kind of range that we're talking about, and that is just for the 2-year initial potential involved homes. So whilst the above projections have been provided by HACT and based on our initial proposed enrolment for retrofit works, it could be noted these prices could rise and they could fall. They're not guaranteed at this stage. The scheme will be operating for 20 years and will be subject to usual market forces of supply and demand. Additionally, though, it should be noted there is scope for future retrofit works to be registered, generated the significant additional credits and greatly increasing our potential income and providing the good work that we've talked about just previously. So subject to comments from Business and Housing Policy Committee, the intention will be to report to Cabinet to seek authority to enter into a contract with HACT to obtain the benefits of the scheme. Any questions or comments, please?
Thank you, Chris. And just to request then the recommendations is to comment on the paper as presented, and for asking for our support then to take it further. So as Chris indicated, the actual sort of financial and the numbers in the report are variable. So I can ask not to have questions about the actual numbers and the details of the actual figures, but actually to have questions that relate to the comment on the scheme and our support of it. so that we don't get into a lot of questions about numbers that are likely to change anyway. So if, as I say, we can just comment on the or ask questions on the actual scheme itself and our support. Can I have a Councillor Scott? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is obviously interesting over the next 20 years to get this right. When we start accumulating the retro credits, how much is it in our interest to try and retain them rather than sell them? It's going to be an interesting complex. And do we know a projection over the time period of 20 years, what the forecast is if we retain a lot of our credits as opposed to giving them away, what that would, you know, would that put us in a better position as an authority? Do we also have a test plate somewhere else that we know other councils have already taken this on board and started this retro credits up that we could actually learn from as well? As the cabinet obviously will make a decision in September, perhaps they could weigh other councils' experiences up before they make a decision moving forward.
So the first part, I guess, is kind of market forces. If those figures change, then you know what you do or can do with that money will obviously have to be considered, I suppose. There may be a tipping point around 2030 where we want to then start offsetting beyond what we've been able to do to the fabric of the homes. This is all for future discussion. And if you would, you know, if we can look at examples, the hacked portal, they're dealing with a number of authorities. I don't think we'd have any problems getting some it is a pilot at this stage, but I don't think we'd have any problem getting some case studies from them about who they're talking to and you know what the ethics are behind that, what people are doing with the money and so forth. So if we can include that in a paper in September, maybe that's the way forward.
And if I may, Chair, only obviously we need to have confidence that if we are reliant on these people saying that the credits are worth exactly what they're worth and something like that, what was obviously earmarked by Councillor Wallace's point, we need to obviously trust the mechanism of these credits and how pertinent they can be and reliant they can be to us. So it'd be interesting to know a bit more on that moving forward.
I was going to say, was that a rhetorical question in terms of its? Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Scott. Any further questions? Councillor Miller.
I can see the logic of entering the scheme. My concern is, if I've got a concern, is that if we sell them, that we don't double count them. And if we sell them, is it going to make it much more difficult for the council to become carbon neutral, though it may have some financial benefit? Because we don't want to be double counting, do we?
No, absolutely not. So we that can't happen through the scheme, as I understand. We either sell them or we utilise the credits ourselves.
Yeah, I suppose what's to make clear is that it's on an annual basis. So you decide to sell them in that annual retrofit credit that lasts for 20 years, or you decide to claim it. So you make that decision early on, so you can't double essentially. And this is why, going back to what Chris was saying, is that the closer we get to 2030, the closer we want to get to net zero, those credits will become more important in terms of what they can offer rather than monetary value of them.
Councillor Prest.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to to have a sort of level sort of sense check on credits as a concept. This is a comment, not a question, if that's okay. And building on what Councillor Wallace was talking about, that there is quite a great deal of squeamishness about the concept of credits out in the world at the moment. That, you know, they're associated with fossil fuel companies and airlines, and sometimes they can feel like a bit of an instrument. And I think that, you know, Councillor Horrell talked earlier about the rational and the emotional. I think rationally, in a time where the city council is going to have to, you know, find funds and find money from wherever it can. It makes sense to pursue all avenues. But, you know, Winchester is a city that's built on decency and integrity and with intelligence and humanity. And therefore, my comment would be, can we please make sure that we think very hard about this as a statement of who we are and the way that Winchester City Council wants to go about things. If I might say, the fact that the company we're dealing with is called Hacked is a matter of slight concern, because as I understand a hack, it is a way round the system. It is a way of finding a shortcut or finding a way to kind of circumvent what otherwise might be controlled or be less possible. So rationally, I applaud it as something to investigate. Emotionally, I would ask that we stay on top of who we're dealing with and what we're dealing with as we go forward.
Thank you, Councillor Prester. Just before Councillor Horrell has a chance to ask her question, Simon would like to just respond to Councillor Prester's question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to respond to the point about Hacked, because I think that's an important point. Hacked is Housing Association Charitable Trust. So this is a charity that's been working since the 1960s, instrumental in setting up some of the biggest housing associations in the country. So I can understand how the acronym might cause concern, but just to reassure you, it's a charitable organisation, supports housing organisations. It came to this because a lot of housing organisations were looking at the challenge of achieving carbon neutrality for their housing stock, realising it would be very difficult to generate the finances for that. So this model was set up to generate a way in which additional finances could be used to fund the carbon neutrality of the housing stock. So as has already been said in the previous item on this agenda, and you've already said it, the council's committed and has an obligation to achieve EPCC by 2030. So calculating any carbon credits could be seen as a bonus because we're doing the work anyway. So it's just whether you want to use this model and how you want to use this model on top of the work that's already happening.
Thank you for that. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. I can see why it's attractive when we know that our bill for retrofit is only going to grow, that there might be a way of accumulating an additional fund. However, I don't see any reassurance in this paper, Chair, that the concept of offsetting versus actually implementing real change can be guarded against. And I also don't see anything that reassures me about verification in any shape or form. So there are words in the paper that talk about, well, we could take some money or we could offset. I think if you were very clear that you wanted the money to reinvest, that would perhaps be a stronger argument. But I think some of us find the whole concept of offsetting a very negative approach and a route through, when actually we should be pushing hard to make real change. So, Chair, I see why it's here. I see why it looks attractive. I don't think we should underestimate the administration to actually manage the scheme with all the various pieces of documentation. And as I say, I don't see anything in the paper. I think the questions I've asked would certainly need to be answered very thoroughly as you move forward, if you choose to, on actually progressing this idea. But it fills me with more concerns than it does joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. I think obviously as part of the presentation, the history of not only the organisation that is sort of being recommended to be used, but the fact that other authorities have also already joined this scheme and have had many years of actually sort of being part of that, is being presented as a reassurance to us that we're not in the vanguard here. We are not sort of being the guinea pig to sort of basically trial this system. The recommendation or the proposal is that we are using a tried and tested mechanism by which the carbon credits would be then traded or assessed and then traded. I think then the question that we have and what's being brought to us is commenting on how those, if we do go ahead with that, can be used. And I agree, to have those credits actually being put back into the system is one option, so that we actually are basically financing the same scheme that has actually created the credits in the first place. That seems to be, you know, sort of one of the clear options that we have in terms of recommendations or comments out of this committee. So I think that's the position we're in, is being asked to make comments on what's being presented. Sorry, Councillor, I think you had a response to that.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify then, because it talks about being established for the pilot in this paper, but you're saying this is already established. I'm just slightly confused. Is it a pilot or is it already working in full? If that could be clarified, that would be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
With regards to the price and the market rate, they're piloting to see where they sit, but there are local authorities who are already established in the scheme. They're using the word pilot as a 20-year, so it's not, you know, never ending. There's a termination for this. So in terms of a definitive market rate and in terms of whether it would go beyond 20 years, it's a pilot, but in terms of signing up now, it isn't. That answers your question.
Sorry, can I just clarify, is the pilot we're referring to Winchester City Council's involvement in the scheme, or is it the overall scheme itself?
The overall scheme itself is running for 20 years, so it's not our pilot. We're entering into an agreement with them to run for the 20 years, which is what they term the pilot, because it's there's a termination, and the market rate to them is a pilot. We're not piloting. We either contract with them or we don't.
So are we to cross-reference in terms of an understanding of the term pilot? Are we here understanding pilot in terms that I think maybe Councillor Horrell is understanding it, of being an initial stage of a process where you go into it in terms of thinking, I don't understand whether this is a valid process, and then I continue, or are you using the word pilot in a different context? Can I just have clarification, please?
Do you want to come in?
I think it's important to make clear this is an existing scheme which some housing authorities and housing associations already signed up to, and their credits are being traded. It's an existing scheme. I think what Prashant was trying to explain was that the way HACT are approaching this is they're running this scheme for a 20-year period. That's the pilot, but organisations already signed up, credits are being traded. So it's not us entering to a pilot scheme, it's not us piloting the scheme, it's just how the HACT organisation determining it at that point in time. Does that help?
Sorry, Councillor, does that clarify the situation for yourself?
That's helpful. Then, Chair, why is the price for debate if the scheme is already running? Thank you.
Because credits are traded. It's a marketplace. You can't guarantee what the price will be. And also over a 20-year period, technology will change, so the value of those credits might change as well.
But there is a market price today if there are people in the scheme. Thank you.
And that's in, sorry, through you, Chair. That's in the report. The price is in the report.
So hopefully, Councillor, that comes back to your question in terms of validity and veracity of the actual scheme itself, and hopefully also helps Councillor Wallace with his question about a similar, you know, sort of point that he made in his question. The scheme, as I understand it, is up and running. We are not being asked to sort of put our sort of faith in something that has yet been proved to be proved. It has a proven track record. As Simon says, it just depends on when, if we decide to enter, when we enter, at which price is current at the time in terms of that market value of those carbon credits that we decide to put into that system.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions? David, did you want to come back to the table to ask any questions or comment on this particular topic?
Thank you very much. Able to ask questions. I think sitting here and listening to the debate on Monday, and also with the report that we've done previous to this tonight, it does show that the city is looking at the whole picture and not just individual bits. And whether this is worthwhile, I don't think we would make a comment. But I think the fact that in 1 week we've learned and understood a whole range of things that could affect what we do for quite a few years, at least should prove to others that someone has done their homework and put forward all these proposals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I think if there's no further questions, I propose that we then move on to debating the recommendations again, which are that we are asked to note and comment on the scheme and whether it whether this committee would support further work and due diligence so as to enable a report to be presented to Cabinet and its September meeting. So if we can just move into a debate, if there's any councillors that wish to present any items on that. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I'm questioning the time and effort that this is going to take and the return for us versus other elements that we have. And I think, as I say, I have a concern about the fundamental basis of offsetting as a principle anyway, and whether we, given our limited resources, this is something that we should be driving further forward. Thank you.
Councillor Horrell. Any other members for debate? Councillor Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I know obviously you advise us not to read into the figures previously, and there are those some strong potential headline figures there. I think given the volatility that we've already discussed tonight and the should we say that the sensitivity about this area, I think my only note would be that in any assessment of this going forward, it kind of needs to be as a balanced portfolio. You kind of say in your report, stocks go up and down, and therefore how these credits proposed to be used going forward should be a balanced consideration, I think, in my view, from that perspective.
Okay, I think in terms of the presentation, my view on that is that this is an opportunity that Winchester City Council has. It's an opportunity that has been presented by the good work that the officers have joined the meeting to present in terms of our retrofit programme, and it's an opportunity I think that we should look at seriously in terms of if we don't take it, then sort of there is a lost sort of opportunity in terms of the trading and the credits that are going to be generated from the retrofit programme. So I think there are concerns that some of the members have in terms of the actual process, and indeed concerns in terms of the sort of position with regard to that trading scheme. But I think there's sort of a general query about how the credits are then going to be used, which I think the committee will sort of feed back into that process. So thank you very much for the presentation. And Councillor Westwood, is there any sort of final comments you'd like to make to this meeting?
Yes, thank you, Jeff. It's very interesting listening to the debate and not being able to stick my hand up and contribute to it, ask questions and do the debate itself. What I'm hearing is that this is a scheme that has a level of scepticism associated with it, and I'm very well aware, as is everybody in this room, that the good reputation of Winchester City Council must not be sullied by going down a path that is not a path that we should be taking as a reputable organisation. I'm sure we all take that on board. And I'm hearing that very clearly. In terms of Councillor Horrell and is the effort worth it? I think it is. We should explore the option. It is there. Whether we go down that path is to be determined at this point, and I hear that loud and clear. That we should look at the cost of doing this, the initial investigation, and the cost of actually running it at the other end. So I'm grateful for all the comments. I'm open-minded on this at the moment. I think it's something that would be remiss of us not to explore. It's not free money, but there is value there, and we should see whether we can make use of our work to generate incremental value for the council. And over the next few months, as we take on board your comments and Councillor Wallace's comments as well, which I think are very valuable, that will give us good steer in terms of how we bring this together and what we bring back to either this committee and through to cabinet or to cabinet, however it will work. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to thank Councillor Westwood for bringing both those papers to the meeting, and to thank the officers, Prashanta, Chris and Amber, for your excellent contributions to the meeting, and for helping us as a committee to understand and clarify some of the questions that we've had about the two papers that have been brought forward. So thank you very much for your time this evening. I think we now move on to the item 9. On the agenda, which denotes the work programme for 2023 to 24. And Matthew, do we have a? Okay, so hopefully this is in your packs as well, but this just goes through the meetings that we have. We have 3 further meetings of the committee on the 19th of September, the 28th of November and the 20th of February. And the items that we're proposing to bring to the meetings are shown on the screen and also in the packs that hopefully you have. Just like to ask if members have any questions about the work schedule in terms of what's now being presented. It is subject to change, and I know that there will be some sort of changes coming forward fairly soon. But if there's actually any questions or comments that members have on the initial presentation of that work programme, happy to sort of receive those now. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. And just for the sake of openness and sort of clarity, I raised this on Monday at Cabinet Housing. And it's not for tonight, but I do think it's a conversation that yourself as chair of this committee, the portfolio holder and the officers need to just have, which is there are other topics, particularly on housing, that I'm aware of, that one would have thought would have made their way either to Cabinet Housing or to your committee chair, and whether we have picked up all the relevant pieces. We have had an example, I think, last year where some things were sort of not covered, and so I think it would be helpful to suggest, if you would be minded to do that, to talk with officers and the portfolio holder just to see where various subjects are being routed, and will we as councillors have an opportunity to have discussions about some of those that are obviously going to be processed, or are they going somewhere else in the governance process? As I say, not for tonight, but I just think it's an action that is worthy of consideration. I'm happy to feed through to the portfolio holders some of the subjects that I thought we ought to be tackling along the way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, for raising that. And yes, I'm sure that those items will be sort of considered. And I understand that you will be having meetings with the cabinet member concerned, and I'm sure that sort of can be raised in that forum. So thank you very much. Any other comments from members? And just in terms of the initial statement of our intent in terms of the work programme. Okay. As I say, we've noted the dates for the meeting there, 19th of September, the 20th of November and the 20th of February. So if there's no further business of the meeting, just like to thank all of the members who've been present this evening, and particularly those obviously who've deputised for unavailable members of the committee. I'd like to thank the members of TACT, Lynn and the two Davids. Thank you for your attendance. Councillor Wallace for your presentations and contribution to the meeting, and to the officers, to Simon, Gilly, to Prashanta, Chris and Amber for again your contributions to this evening. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Matthew. And I think that concludes our meeting at 8:30. And thank you very much again, and look forward to meeting again on the 19th of September. Thank you.